Hey folks, welcome to the Dr. Deals podcast, where we talk about healthcare business transactions. I'm Nick Newsat from healthcontract.com. Today, we're going to talk to Scott Becker about his new book, The Entrepreneur's Edge. Scott Becker is the publisher and founder of Becker's Healthcare. He's a partner and former chair of the healthcare department and a board member at McGuire Woods Law Firm. Scott hosts the Becker's Private Equity and Business podcast, and tomorrow is the first day of Becker's 30th annual ASC conference in Chicago. On top of all that, he's going to talk to me about his new book, The Entrepreneur's Edge. Scott, thanks for squeezing me in.
Nick, never squeezing you in. What a pleasure to get a chance to visit with you, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Of course, the pleasure's all mine. So let's talk about this book. So one of the early chapters in The Entrepreneur's Edge talks all about how pivots are the norm. So please tell us, how has the focus of both your media business and your law practice changed or pivoted over the last 30 years?
Sure. So we're a big believer that you need to have a core game plan for whatever business you're in, a core sense of what you're trying to do, and then you need to 80% of your time focusing on just doing that, making sure it goes great, and then 20% on thinking about what changes, what evolutions, what are your plans, what are you trying to do. And so I'd look at a couple of big pivots in both efforts. In the media company, we started off 100 years ago in print with print newsletters and a small conference, and we couldn't compete in the print environment with the biggest competitor. And so we ultimately really doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on trying to be a leader in digital media, in electronic newsletters, in websites. And you have to remember, this goes back 25, 30 years ago. So it was a very different environment then. So that was sort of one big pivot. The second big pivot we made at Becker's Healthcare was at one point 30 years ago, we started off in the sector, the surgery center sector. And, fast forward 5 to 10 years from there, we ended up growing into two other big areas, the hospital and health system sector and the orthopedic and spine sector. And now the hospital and health system sector, together with the health IT sector, is the biggest part of the Becker's Healthcare company. But those were big choices, big pivots, big learning experiences to where we would end up directing the company, directing efforts. I mean, similarly, in the healthcare law practice, in both these things were done with a ton of colleagues, many of which drove the practice in the media company much further than I could. The law practice is very similar. We started off in a couple specific sectors, niche sectors, but if you're trying to build a bigger practice, we couldn't just be in those sectors, and we had to grow into a bigger and bigger footprint, bigger firm. And so we moved from strategically very similarly from surgery centers at one time to hospitals and health systems, and then over the last decade, really 15, 20 years, into the sort of investor world, the private equity healthcare world. And those have been big pivots. They required building bigger teams, greater clarity. It's almost like in today's world, people talk about, and Nicholas, cut me off at any time, people talk about point solutions. We originally sort of started with point solutions, but you can't build the size team and quality of team and what you're trying to do with being so narrow. So we ended up expanding in both areas into some other areas that were very close to the core, but they were big pivots for us, even though they might not have seemed like big pivots to other people.
Sure. Fortunately, healthcare changes all the time, so there's always plenty of opportunities for pivoting. You just have to decide what you're going to do.
That's exactly right.
So another one of the chapters in your book is called Digging Ditches. Now, digging ditches is not a phrase we usually hear in a positive context. What do you mean when you talk about digging ditches?
Sure. It's a great question, and I probably didn't explain it well enough in the book that you have to ask the question, but I think that's probably fair. So I always feel that, when you start building a business of any sort, and you've built a business, you understand that there is a certain period of time. The more common phrase today, at least one of the more common phrases today, is until you get a flywheel going, until things get just a little bit easier. So my perspective was, when you're first building a business, you got to take 10 steps into it, dig 10 ditches before you start to see any returns. And it takes a very long time. We jokingly say until the ditches start to dig themselves, because it never really happens. But you have to build enough credibility, enough critical mass, and enough forward actions that you start to get both good at what you're doing and start to build a customer base. And I think many people get discouraged early on because they don't see the return in the development of the business as quickly as they'd like to. So the concept was, how I always thought about it when I was a much younger person, was you got to dig so many ditches until they start digging themselves. But that was really the concept, that to really get something going, it requires a lot of forward effort. You don't see the returns for some time. So you have to stick past that uncertain zone until you start to see the returns. And again, that doesn't mean that at some point you don't decide, okay, I'm done with this concept. But that's what I mean by digging ditches until they start digging themselves.
I like that. I'd never heard that phrase before reading your book. Maybe it'll catch on.
I don't know. I thought of it that way for a long time. When you're building something, you're very much in a grind of sorts. And I've seen so many people that are brilliant, that are hardworking, that are motivated, that are driven, sort of give up before they get to that spot to where it really starts to take hold. And so the concept of people we talk to is, it's not that you should never give up an idea. You should. If you spent years on it, you can't get any place. But the concept being, it's going to take a couple of years till you start getting some momentum and it starts going in the direction you want it to. We always thought about it as, you got to dig enough ditches till they start digging themselves. Was just a very simple concept.
Now, there's another chapter called Tuning Out the Naysayers. Now, that's probably a topic that resonates with virtually everyone. What encouragement or encouraging things can you share about dealing with naysayers?
Sure. So there's two things. Anytime you start anything, you're going to have people that think that that it's a bad idea, that it's a crazy idea. One of the people that I respect the most, when I first started getting into the health system part of this, not the surgery center part of that, thought we couldn't do it, that it was crazy, that there was too much competition out there, that we should just stick to our lane, meaning the surgery center lane. A couple of people that sort of told me that are people that I absolutely adore and love and respect their thoughts tremendously, and we had to make the choice at some point we're going to push forward regardless. But the other thing that happens is, whenever you're building something, there's a great phrase, it's been used a million times throughout business and life, that you don't really, know what that you're making any headway until somebody hits you in the face. And the concept being, you don't get hit in the face if you don't step in the ring. But when I really first started my newsletter, I remember vividly a colleague of mine, a friend who I like a great deal, said, I get your newsletter, I use it as toilet paper. And this must go back 25, 30 years or so.
Wow.
And he said it jokingly. He thought he was being funny, but it was sort of the kind of thing, is like, whatever effort you're in, you're going to take some shots. You're going to have naysayers, and you have to make a decision at some point. Are they right or are they wrong? They're usually not right, but you have to be able to respect their judgment, because there might be pivots and adjustments you have to make. But whatever you do, there's going to be naysayers, and you have to sort of play through all that if you want to be successful. I know very few people, people talk about the overnight success. They talk about this, they talk about that. I'm not familiar with that. I've not had those. Almost any effort I've had, there's times where I've thought about, should I hang it up? Should I not hang it up? And it's like tremendous sort of working through the naysayers, digging the ditches to make them actually move in the right direction, to get them closer to where we wanted them to be. So that's the concept of don't listen to the naysayers. I think anybody who's been in business or started a business has had some people say, oh, you can't do that. That's not going to happen. There's, too much competition. You don't have the goods, whatever it might be. And that was the concept.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear from you, Scott. Even Scott Becker, the most famous healthcare lawyer in America, had naysayers and doubts starting out.
I mean, so many, for sure. I mean, everybody does. I feel like anybody that says they haven't is either very blessed, very charmed, started on third base or something else. But most of us you have to deal with the reality of challenges.
Now, in your book, you talk about focusing on what works best, but also being open to new ideas. What would you say works best at Becker's Healthcare?
Well, I think when I think about what works best, I view it very simply. I start with any business and the leaders, the founders, the CEOs. First, they better understand their own business. And when I think about understanding our own business, I think of that as understanding, what are the most important verticals or areas that we serve, who are our most important customers, and who are our most important people. And I think any business you're in, you spend a lot of time making sure that you keep on honing down on those, that you spend 80% of your efforts. I've always thought of it as an 80% thing, and it's not an exact science. It's obviously, an amorphous number, but to spend 80, 90% of your time really focusing on most important revenue and profit areas, most important people, most important customers, and you just keep on coming back to those things while you sort of explore additional lines, additional people, additional growth. I always think about the indispensable customer, the indispensable executive. Anybody who's grown a business has gone through periods where you have indispensable people. And the answer is not to get rid of those people. It's always to keep those people, keep those customers, and add more. So it's not indispensable or else. It's indispensable, and let's grow with and around those people and customers. So what works well is we've got a magnificent team of people. We try and stay very, very close to the areas that we work in, and we try and take care of our customers really well. I mean, and we try and make sure our audience and our markets, we always say we've got to be a magnet for listeners, a magnet for readers, and a magnet for conference attendees. And it's constant work to keep that going. But those are some of the things that work well.
So today, I would venture to say that side hustles or side businesses are not super common among professionals who have full-time jobs. Could you please explain how your side hustle, Becker's Healthcare, has benefited and complemented the McGuire Woods law firm over the years?
Sure. So you're right. So your point is well taken. So I grew up in a different era, and so in the era I grew up in, a lot of people that were going to law school wanted to be lawyers and entrepreneurs. So you were a lawyer. A lot of people were also real estate investors. They were, they did other things, whatever it might be. And it was a different era. And obviously, as the world has become a much more sophisticated place, it's much more challenging at a major law firm, a major consulting firm, a major accounting firm, whatever it is, to do those kinds of things. I was fortunate when I started this 30 plus years ago. I started it with the core intention of building the law practice. That was the original purpose in it, building a healthcare law practice and trying to paint myself as what's thought of as a thought leader. It turned out, a handful of years into this goes back. We had a predecessor law firm. That firm was a terrific firm, but I was a young lawyer, and they wouldn't support it because they couldn't put marketing dollars towards a young lawyer. So I ended up having to self-fund everything. So I ended up sort of building this company. It was intended to be a marketing thing. And some years into it was like, oh my God, this can be a real business. And at that point started hiring people full-time into Becker's Healthcare. And that was sort of the growth of it. And so I had this unusual, fortunate situation of sort of straddling two different careers for 30 years, where I really built over a long period of time the law practice and built the team there. Then at some point, ended up over time building the media company and both the efforts. I mean, I never go a day without being thankful to, on the media company, Jessica Cohen, a whole bunch of other people. On the law firm side, Amber Walsh, Holly Buckley, Bart Walker, Jeff Cockrell, a whole bunch of people that really built those practices and really built the media company that I fire started or helped to start. But we've been able to maintain the balance for a long time. I partnered at McGuire Woods, love the firm. We merged into them 20 plus years ago. But at that point, the media company was already well established from a much smaller firm that we were with that we merged into McGuire Woods with. And so I was fortunate to be able to sort of enjoy these two parts of the brain, these two parts of business for a very long time. And my partners at McGuire Woods have been incredibly gracious with it, and we've tried to be incredibly gracious with our partners too. So it's been a great ride.
Well, it sounds like a good complementary arrangement. So hopefully some employers are listening to this and they can appreciate, the entrepreneurial efforts of their employees.
It's always a challenge, but yes, no, the firm has been very supportive, and it's been fascinating, and I'm thankful, quite frankly. But we've had a great fun with it. It's allowed me, scratch different itches that I have, build a business, meet incredibly interesting people, and also be very, very supportive of the law firm McGuire Woods, which we're just a huge fan of everything about it.
Lastly, why did you feel it was important to include a large section about personal money management in a book about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so this is a great question, Nick, and I'm not sure I've got a great answer to it. When I originally put this book together, I was trying to. There's a lot of core thinking and ideas that I work with all the time. And so I'll tell you a couple of different things. So when I first put this book together, it was really envisioned as a core place to put a lot of my business thoughts and a lot of my investment thoughts in one place. So that was really in one place. So I had easy reference to it. That was the purpose of it. It is not like it's not selling billions of books. I'm not making a living with the book. But the purpose was, as much as anything, for a few people I work with regularly, for my children, they have these core concepts in one place. So they always had a sense of them, and so I could always point to them. So it was. So then we ended up doing a first version of the book that came out a couple years ago. That was not horrendous, but it was not what I was. It was so bad that I was not. I wouldn't distribute it. I didn't distribute it. I didn't make the effort to distribute it, and so we went back to the grindstone and worked a lot on making this more concise and clearer and better. And it still is completely imperfect. It's not by any means a Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's a core concept book for people that are interested in core concepts about business. And I like it for that purpose. And I'm obviously like you. I believe in the short form way of dealing with things. So love it. I don't, the book is imperfect, but I like the short form content. So at some point, had to figure out whether now in another edition or a different edition, whether we pull out the money management tips, which is 100%, different. The way that they tie together is, if you're an entrepreneur and you start, the way they really tie together is, I was trying to put these concepts all in one place for my children and some other people I work with. So that's how they really tie together. But the way they tie together theoretically or practically is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're living as an entrepreneur, there's this concept, multiple different concepts. One is, you've got to constantly make sure, if you've got a business that has 90% of your net worth in it, you better make sure you're constantly building net worth outside the business too, so that you're safe if the business falls apart. It's almost like the old phrase of having money in case your boss fires you. Same concept. The second concept is, if you're an entrepreneur, built a business, developed a nest egg, what I think that with all the noise in the media about people being tech billionaires and all that kind of stuff, my perspective, and grew up in a family that had financial challenges. So my perspective was always that it is not easy to do. So if you do it and happen to get fortunate and the sort of stars align, you put money away, one of my core concepts is, don't mess it up. And that means, on the other side of this, and I've got close friends that took the other path. One of my closest friends, who ended up on our board for years, who passed away too early, was a person who had built a business, sold it for a crazy amount of money, managed to blow that money through buying yachts, big houses, all those kinds of things. Then he was fortunate to do it again, which to me is unfathomable. Me, these things tie together because I have a recognition of, I think it'd be impossible for me to do it again. That's not false humility. I think it's just the drive, the energy, all the things you have to come together to building teams, the finding niches, the competitive world that we're in today. It'd be almost impossible to do it again. So I also wanted a roadmap And how do you then keep that money safe? How do you not mess that up? That's how those two things tie together.
Well, that sounds like excellent advice. Making money is certainly completely different thing from keeping it. So I've read The Entrepreneur's Edge. It is an easy read. I gave it a 5-star rating on Amazon. And Scott, I will swing by to pick up my autographed copy the next time I'm in Chicago.
Nick, I am so thankful for you having me on. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
This is Nick Newsat from healthcontract.com, recommending you pick up Scott Becker's new book, The Entrepreneur's Edge. And as always, let's do some doctor deals.